A decade and a half later, Mirror's Edge remains a timeless experience that, interestingly enough, came at an unlikely predictable time. You see, the majority of the seventh generation of consoles saw the rise in commonality of two art styles many big budget games shared. The piss filter, where an exaggerated amount of yellow tint overlaid the game, and the greedy realism that featured an array of desaturated grays and browns spread through dark and moody composition. In all fairness, the latter was really appealing when it fitted the game's themes and atmosphere, like the first Gears of War or Killzone 2, but elsewhere, it was done for the sake of copying without adding any substance. So, in the middle of this trend, very few games stood out from the crowd, and even fewer featured original game design concepts. But in 2008, a project developed by Digital Illusions Creative Entertainment and published by Electronic Arts released into the masses, appropriately named Mirror's Edge, and it immediately wows anyone who lays eyes on it. A unique game with innovative first-person platforming mechanics and a vibrant art direction that to this day remains unmatched and one of the game's most talked about points. I could derail this conversation into the many elements that make this experience what it is, but today I want to specifically deconstruct and dissect its game design, mainly the gameplay structure, loops, and the free-running influence traversal, which to this day I consider a masterclass in game feel that never compromises player agency for the sake of anything else. A video game-ass video game, if you will. Alongside those, we'll also touch upon other elements that aid in the final presentation, such as the level design, art direction, and also a comparison to the sequel and equate how both entries stack with each other. So sit back and enjoy the study as we explore what makes Mirror's Edge's platforming so intuitive and fun. Mirror's Edge's design language is inspired by both sports of freerunning and parkour, which are two entirely different things, believe it or not. Parkour predates early in history, varying from many existing cultural activities around the globe, and very later down the line, its popularity bubbled majorly from Hong Kong action cinema, with Jackie Chan being a notable performer and pushing the boundaries of how risque and extreme it could be taken. But in terms of it being strictly bound as a movement-based style, the majority of the credit goes to Yamakasi, a group of young French adult practitioners of the at the time coined l'art du déplacement in the late 90s, the art of movement in English, and its appeal was the simple act of moving around urban obstacles in the most stylish way possible. There's even a film and a documentary titled Yamakasi and Generation Yamakasi respectively, which I strongly recommend giving both a watch if you're interested. As it is with many groups where ideals starts to clash, David Bell and Sébastien Faucon, two members of the group, decided to split up and further refine l'art du déplacement into something more towards their ideals. This gave birth to parkour as we know it today. As defined by David, parkour is the art of reaching from point A to point B in the fastest and most efficient way possible. This places a major focus on flexibility and adaptability, from reading the environment to the use of appropriate moves that won't slow you down under very strict and limiting time-bound scenarios. It also asks the practitioners to eventually find their own rhythm, pace and style as they gradually increase their proficiency, methodology, and ultimately confidence when it comes to improving oneself, which I personally admire a lot. Parkour is something I've tried in the past as a kid and with moderate success, but I don't think I have the guts nowadays to pull more life-threatening stunts as I used to back in the day, after luckily scraping my elbow instead of falling headfirst while jumping from rooftop to rooftop at a friend's neighborhood, and that's a story I'll keep to myself. As parkour has progressed over the years and gained a name for itself worldwide, Sébastien Faucon also felt it was time to leave and create something similar but more skewed towards his ideals, which became known as freerunning. Even though freerunning shares some principles with parkour, and Sébastien himself often struggles how to define it sometimes, it is widely agreed upon that freerunning itself is the art of creating expression in mobility, while also adhering to the point A to point B philosophy, which ultimately makes this a discipline a mix of l'art du déplacement and parkour. Not just that, but from his many interviews, he always suggested that freerunning was geared towards more personal and individual experiences in the way practitioners approach the sport, similar to Bruce Lee's Jeet Kune Do, a mix of existing and new practices. Both sports as a whole blew up big time in the early 2010s to the point of pop culture mainstream, and its influence could be felt in media, from films and TV shows to advertisements and eventually video games, with Mirror's Edge's existence being made as a statement to the FPS genre, something that would break general design conventions popular at the time, and breathe new life with the inclusions of many outside elements not just from different genres, as well from other media itself. For example, the strong influence of the opening chase scene from Casino Royale featuring Sebastian himself, and the Bourne films and how Jason processes his environment while moving, as clearly visible in the final game's fluid nature and design sensibilities. So, how does all of this translate into the final game? Pretty simple actually, and it all starts with how the game is designed. The game structure of Mirror's Edge is based in three design pillars, from what I can deduce: story, platforming, and combat. In the story pillar, our main character is Faith, a courier who was supposed to be part of a government-heavy surveillance society, and her main method of transportation is, well, running, more specifically free running, as it is the easiest and most convenient way to avoid the heat from the cops. And this information automatically feeds into our second pillar, platforming. From a fixed first-person perspective, we get to execute the basic layer of actions present in any game of the same genre, such as running, jumping, and sliding. But, moreover, the more complex moves can be attributed to the free-running layer that's added on top, such as vaults, wall running, coil, skill roll, and the list keeps growing. So, with story establishing the circumstances and platforming allowing us to live one part of it, our third pillar, combat, allow us to live that second part, where our main methods of inducing violence on our foes are hand-to-hand combat and the usage of firearms. While using the latter is self-explanatory, performing the former has the added benefit of chaining attacks with the platforming itself, such as wall running and jumping off with a kick, or sliding and kicking the opponent. In the end though, looking at the final product not from a game designer's perspective but as a consumer, some aspects of those pillars can vary in quality, and while some shine brighter than the others, in the end it can't be understated the amount of influence platforming alone has, and how it can trump combat in the majority of your playthrough. Alongside the pillars, the general gameplay loop also needs to be taken into consideration, one that is very traditional when you think about it, because just like with any linear game, you go from navigation, cutscene, combat, navigation, so on and so forth, and this structure varies from level to level. Side note, but two interesting aspects about the gameplay loop to point out and how loose it can become in our hands is how first, 85 to 90% of combat encounters can be avoided by the amount of agency the platforming offers when you get a perfect flow. The game never locks you into a combat zone, and most often it never forces us to directly engage with it unless we want to. This is evident when we hold weapons. If, for example, you were to hold a two-handed weapon, movement slows significantly, you have a limited amount of ammo, and the game never tells you how many bullets you have in a chamber, meaning that once you empty the gun, you have no more use for it. One could say such agency gives the game a racing game-like philosophy, where combat is just an obstacle where you're given the option to either avoid it or face it, but at the cost of losing time. And second, how much of a secret layer there exists within the platforming, thanks to the tireless efforts of the speedrunning community, as they explored how to exploit the game and get the most out of it by performing unthinkable, glitched and unglitched methods that almost melted my brain when I watched them as a kid back in the day. If you're by any chance curious of what the community has found to aid them, check out this video series from YouTube user Blue Satin, where he details some of the most popular moves, like, for example, sidestep boost, where if you dodge sideways and then turn in the direction of where you want to run, the game automatically puts you at full speed. I don't exactly know the actual information on what makes this possible, but I bet it has to do with how the game calculates physics. One of Mirror's Edge's greatest accomplishments that is not often discussed is the attention to detail to the game feel, and how smoothly it conveys the fluidity of motions and weightiness from beginning to end, and it all starts with the animations. According to the devs, all first-person animations were handmade, and the majority of them have multiple variable transitions that dynamically adapt to the height and speed the player goes through them. For example, climbing a set of ladders sounds simple, but you'd need to consider the speed at which the players are coming, which direction they're coming from, which height are they approaching, are they walking towards it or jumping towards it, and when you know it, you can add up to 30 plus variations and transitions needed to accommodate every possible scenario. Or what about a door, the millennial dilemma every developer faces at some point? Okay, you can open the door, but how will you do it though? Will you be running towards it and punching it? Will you be standing still and kick it? Will you be doing this and that? And once again, it can't be understated the amount of attention these minor details receive, which ultimately enhance the final experience. Another detail that's not really talked about is the extreme and minute details employed to add to the extra immersion. For example, there's a heavy reliance on head bobbing within every movement, whether you jump, coil, wall run, and the like. And jumping back into the animations, there's this sense of weight with every full motion of Faith's movements, as if the way she moved is motivated by the fear of imminent doom under or around the corner, as one misstep can end her life instantly. We can't forget the amount of heavy lifting the level design does in giving us the fantasy of a freerunner, but it's not always smooth sailing. For starters, the levels are very linear, almost built like racetracks, but such linearity never limits the game from expanding in particular areas and letting us figure out how we want to proceed. So, when you usually look at these levels, they are very expansive and broad in terms of environmental details, but never to the point of disorientating the player in which direction to go, and all of that is thanks to the unique art direction. The beauty of this game's art direction is how simple and clean it is, no pun intended. Not only does it stand out vividly, but it smartly communicates the golden path we need to take should we get lost, but it isn't always perfect, though. One of the rougher aspects of the level design is how it is pretty easy to get lost because, as much as the game makes an effort to communicate to us the intended path, and most times achieving its goal, it's not always as smooth as it needs to be, which results in full stop moments during runs, and subsequently breaking the momentum we were carrying. For more insight into this, I suggest reading Alex Galuzin, a professional level designer, article on the matter, which is very insightful. At the end of the day though, there are two elements that mitigate getting lost in levels, with one being pressing the hint button, which recenters and literally points the camera to the intended path, and second, the smartest choice that not only does a ton of work as an important signpost, but heavily contributes to the art direction, which is the runner vision. Essentially, the runner's vision represents how Faith sees the world by highlighting the most important objects she can make use of during her runs with the color red. Not only does this idea satisfy an important trait of Faith as a character, but gameplay-wise it helps the player guide themselves through the levels, with minimal requirement of pop-up tutorials and additional visual signifiers to point the way forward. It's also funny when you think about how the color red in general means stop or danger, but in the context of the game, it's so ingrained in guidance and at this point iconic thanks to the art direction that if you try using any other color, it just wouldn't strike as much, if you get what I mean. Given this analysis has so far been mostly focused on the original Mirror's Edge, I want to touch upon Mirror's Edge Catalyst, the sequel, but instead of delving deep into it as it would lengthen the video runtime, I just want to focus on the platforming improvements over the first game and the game feel itself. Mirror's Edge Catalyst is a very interesting case in terms of how they handled both the platforming and game feel, given the jump to an open world structure and modern game design sensibilities. Personally, I feel that while the platforming is an improvement and the best representation of what the Mirror's Edge parkour system has to offer, the game feel took a bit of a step back, which I deduce was most likely due to accessibility reasons. So, when it comes to platforming, on top of the base established with the first game, we have refinements, quality of life improvements, and additional moves that significantly add to the fluidity of the gameplay. For example, you can turn around corners while wall running towards a pipe, you can do a quick 180 while sliding, you can roll out of a slide, and many more other tricks the player can pull off. These additions are wonderful and smooth out some of the areas the original Mirror's Edge lacks. There's also the addition of a grappling hook, which, to be honest, doesn't have much use outside of traversal in specific parts of the map, or during missions where you either need to zip to a higher place or bring down planks blocking your way. So in essence, it doesn't have any transformative effects on the core parkour system, which is a shame, as the changes it could have brought might have been significant, so I'll blame this on dev time not being enough to fully flesh it out. Another thing lacking is the game feel, but I'm really conflicted on this one. For me, parkour in Catalyst feels static, and I don't mean the mechanics, as I've praised them. I'm more talking about the little things that gave the first Mirror's Edge game that sense of weight, such as head bobbing, and the excessive momentum of the animations that simulated Faith's body weight and how it would react with her moves and gravity to a degree. Like this example of the coil move. You can see in the first game, Faith pulls her own weight during the wind-up and immediately returns to her normal state, but in the second game, there's no wind-up that simulates a sense of weight similar to the first game, making the animation look flat. With the head bobbing, I associate that with motion sickness, so I understand the decision of not including it in this game, but at the same time, a toggleable option in the menus would have been nice, so overall, I like viewing the first Mirror's Edge as having the best feeling out-of-body experience, while Catalyst is just more mechanically fulfilling. It really can't be understated how ahead of its time Mirror's Edge was and still is. While it might have not met lofty sales numbers and critical acclaim, over the years it has become a cult classic, being adored for its gameplay and art direction, and Catalyst, while not being as strong as an overall package, it still carries some quality features that shouldn't be dismissed, such as the more expanded parkour experience. You can faintly see some games influenced by Mirror's Edge at the time of release through the subsequent years, from indies such as Ghost Runner and Neon White, to high-profile AAA games such as Dying Light and Dishonored, to name a few. Particularly Dying Light, which shares many similarities with Mirror's Edge, while also doing its own thing to distinguish itself. I mention this as I'm currently playing through Dying Light 2 with a homie of mine through co-op, and we're enjoying the heck out of it, but back to the point. While the current sentiment for the franchise is one of doubt about its future, in the case the series does return, my only request is that if the series goes back to its roots and returns to linear levels, take the lessons learned from both games and adapt it into a wide linear format. Linear to keep the pacing consistent and spreading out set pieces as intended, and wide for exploration and letting players play around and figure out the most optimal paths for themselves. No hand-holding or anything. In case the series takes to open world again, then I believe there's no better suggestion than Game Maker's Toolkit video on how adapting the Burnout Paradise open world formula allows for the player to be very engaged not only with the content but with the mechanics as well. This is all just wishful thinking of my part, and it's up to the devs to design their games however they want. But if nothing is to come out of it in the following years, then at least I'm happy we got two unique games that left their mark in the industry.